Okay. Very good. Well, we will open the meeting of the City of Sandy Planning Commission for Monday, January 22nd, 2024 at 6:32 in the evening, and we will begin with a roll call.
Okay, I'm going to start with the people in the room. So Commissioner Wegener.
Here.
Commissioner Vincent.
Here.
Commissioner Ramsayer.
Here.
Commissioner Poulin.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Myram.
Here.
And Chair Crosby.
Here.
And then Rebecca for the minutes. Counselor Mayton is here as well.
Right, thank you.
Okay, the first thing on our agenda this evening is to the selection of chair and vice chair. We do this every January. And we changed our rules last year. We started term limits and Jerry's term is up. So I can't do it again, which is absolutely fine with me. The way we've done this in the past is we have this awkward moment where everybody just kind of looks around at each other and wonders what's going on. But I will say just that I know that a couple of you have expressed an interest in particular positions. And I will let you, the two, speak to that yourselves. To say which one you're interested in.
I would like to nominate myself for chair and Commissioner Lee for vice chair.
Okay, that's a good way. Just jump in there.
I'll do it all.
Yeah.
Thumbs up for that.
Need a second to that.
I will second that.
All right. Any discussion? Anybody have anything else they want to, maybe if there's somebody else that would like to jump in? If not, all in favor, say aye.
I
Aye. Any opposed? Nothing seen. All right. We have a new chairman and a new vice chairman. And that will, their positions will start next month. We talked about doing it today. It's kind of awkward changing make plates and all that stuff. So that will begin next month. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I get to sit in a different seat. And then the next thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. This is from our November 27, 2023 meeting. The minutes were in your packet. Anything, additions, corrections, changes that anybody noted? Okay, I'm seeing nothing and hearing nothing. So we will declare the minutes approved as presented. Then in each of our meetings, we give opportunities for anybody in the public to speak to the Planning Commission on items that are not on the agenda for the evening. So we invite that at this time. And this meeting is a hybrid meeting, meaning that it's also on Zoom. We have 3 of our commissioners are here via Zoom. But if you are a guest and you would like to speak to the Planning Commission now on a topic that's not on the agenda, if you're on Zoom, you click the raise hand button, wait to be recognized. If you're here on the telephone, it's *9. That effectively raises your hands and then wait to be recognized. So this is just general public opportunities to speak. Anybody? Okay. Not done. We'll move on to the director's report, which was also in our packet. Do you want to review anything, Kelly, or?
Yeah, I guess just a couple quick things. So there is an upcoming meeting in February to talk about the economic opportunities analysis and the housing capacity analysis, both of which you've already heard quite a bit about in the past at work sessions. But those will be coming before you for an actual public hearing. Similar to tonight, your decisions based on that will be to recommend either approval or denial or approval with modifications to the city council, very similar to the main item tonight that you'll be hearing about. The March meeting, I don't have anything at this point. If we do hold something, it would most likely be a work session, which Patrick would be leading. I'm not going to be around. And then in April, we're going to be jumping back into the comprehensive plan. So the first one's going to be on April 1st, which is going to be talking about block 3 of the comprehensive plan. And then after that, there'll probably be another one in early May, and then maybe even another one in early June before we go to the adoption hearings. So just so you know, the comprehensive plan is getting very close to being finished. Block 3 is the last block. And at the same time, they're starting to put together the actual formal document. So it's very likely that in early April, you'll talk about block 3. And then about a month after that, you'll actually see the draft document and be able to start commenting on that. The other thing is I will be sending this week an email to everybody. I think it actually said it in here under the comprehensive plan update that we'll be sending an email about the draft goals and policies for block 3. Hoping to send that either tomorrow or the next day. And that'll be going to the commission and also to the city council. That'll be the initial opportunity to make comments or suggestions before it goes to the Citizen Community Advisory Committee, and then also back to you guys for a work session. So be on the lookout for that email. And then the only other big thing I wanted to mention is on the moratorium. We're still in negotiations with DQ and EPA. I'm getting emails and phone calls about it daily from different people kind of wondering where it's at. Unfortunately, we're dealing with the state and a very large federal agency. And so the negotiations have been going on since October. We're hopeful that they're going to be concluded in February or March, maybe sooner, although it's almost the end of January. So I think February is probably the earliest at this point. And then depending on the results of those negotiations with the stress test, we're hopeful that we're going to have more additional capacity to be able to potentially divvy out for development.
Mhm.
I think the document that we sent the EPA was like 3,500 pages. And then they came back with, I think, 40 or 50 pages of questions. And I think they've now worked that down to like 10 pages of unresolved things between us and those agencies. So it's getting there. It's a slow process.
And when you say you're hopeful that we'll be able to do more connections, probably though not an open-ended one quite yet, or
I wouldn't anticipate it, no. And the reason why is because we, as I think I've explained in the past, we have a lot of, and everybody up here knows, we have a lot of land use decisions that have been approved and they're kind of just waiting. So first, those ones would be accommodated first and foremost, since they already have land use approval. And then any additional capacity above that, then that could be where we distribute some allocation. And how we go about doing that, that's kind of yet to be determined. But we are, in the background, we are working on some different ideas of how we would do that if that does turn out to be the case. And our public works department's very busy on trying to come up with other solutions at the existing treatment plant to add more potential capacity over the next couple of years. But as you can imagine, everything's a lot of red tape, a lot more so than the local level, even because we're dealing with federal agency. And then the other thing also in addition to that is everything that we are looking at, obviously it's very expensive. I mean, basically everything's like $10 million plus, right? Everything you do at a treatment plant. So it's very expensive and very time consuming.
anybody have a question for staff, for Kelly, I guess, among staff? Okay. All right, we have assume he's still there. I'm only seeing 4 pictures here. Our planning commissioner, council liaison. Any comments for us Mr. May.
Hi, Chair. Hi, Commissioners. Thanks for having me again. I think for this group, the only thing that really is new happened in City Council last week was the approval of the award of contract for Cedar Park. The bids came in, low bid was awarded, and if you haven't driven by it lately, you know I think the skate park's already been removed or started to be removed, and they've started to work very quickly over there. So that's exciting news, but also a bit of a sore for kids that still want to use the park right now. We just got to get the new park built, so that's going to take a little bit of time. Other than that, I'd like to say congratulations to the new chair to be, Darren, or Commissioner Wagner. Thank you for volunteering, and Commissioner Lee, thanks again for another position you're going to hold within the community. I'm looking forward to it, and thank you all for a good year last year, and look forward to being with you again this year.
Thank you. Thanks for joining our meeting, Chris. Okay, in new business, I'm going to add a new one that just came in today. Because the Planning Commission got a letter from Sarah McIntyre, who is the library director here in Sandy. And I'm just going to read that because it didn't go to the rest of you, did it?
No.
I'm just going to read it as quickly as I can. So I'm writing to you in your position as the chair of the Planning Commission. The Sandy and Hoodland libraries would be interested in coming to an upcoming meeting to present the possibility of a library outreach vehicle coming to your community. We would love to get your group's input on where the library should park and the best times for us to be in the area. The outreach vehicle we are planning for will be ADA accessible, have materials for checkout, internet access, computers, and a scanner printer. We could also bring educational STEM activities, crafts, and story times for children. We will be able to issue library cards and talk about library services, such as cultural passes, downloadable ebooks and e-audiobooks, our Library of Things collection, and library programs for all ages. If your group would like to support the library further in our endeavors to raise funds for the vehicle, we would love to receive a letter of support. This is the crux of the letter. The budget committee for the city of Sandy has awarded us enough money to purchase the vehicle, and we need additional funds to outfit it for use. We are currently applying for a $50,000 grant to help us obtain shelving, desks, rolling carts, and a projector and screen to teach computer classes. Your letter of support would show that the community is behind our efforts and gave us things to do. So what they're asking for is basically a letter of support from the Planning Commission, as Kelly and I talked before the meeting. If you're familiar with the granting process, when you get in your application for a grant that you can show that the community leaders are behind it, it helps with it. So what this would be, it would, if everybody's favorable to it, would be a letter that would be drafted, and my suggestion was to have each one of us individually, so it shows multiple people, not just the chair, sign it somehow. Somehow we'd figure out how to do it. But thoughts, ideas, yays or nays?
I love the idea.
I like it.
A 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and if they saw that pull up to their neighborhood park, they would go nuts. They would absolutely have so much fun.
Yeah, it does sound pretty cool. Well then, without not hearing other comments one way or the other, I think what we just need is a motion. If we had a motion, can we ask staff to draft a letter for us?
Yeah,
Okay.
certainly.
Okay. A motion for staff to draft a letter on behalf of the Planning Commission in support of this project that we'll figure out how each of us would sign.
Well, that sounds like an excellent motion that I would second.
I don't know if I can make a motion. That's
So I would move that we draft a letter to support the library's request.
I'll second.
okay. It's been moved and seconded to have staff draft us a letter in support of this library project. And we'll sign it. We'll just do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. So look for something in your mailbox sometime to says either come in and sign it, or they'll have a way for you to do it electronically.
You know, on that, if we could get everybody's electronic signature, it'd probably be best anyways for purposes in the future of signing similar letters or
Mhm.
final orders in the case that the chair is not able to sign it. So
'Cause I know
we'll try to figure out a way to do that so you guys can all sign once, and then we'll have it so we can add it to future letters. And stuff.
Bank notes, checks.
I know, I'm thinking,
all that
Sure.
stuff there.
huh,
Kelly's request for a raise, you know.
Alexis.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we have one public hearing this evening. I don't expect it to be a short one, but I think it'll be fun. And that is, yeah, pull it up here. And I will open the public hearing at 6:49. And this is for the review of code amendments that we had in our packet. And as Kelly's already mentioned, this is one where we make a recommendation to city council. We don't make a final decision on this one. It's the clear and objective code audit. Any abstentions? Anybody on the? Well, it's great to see everybody here tonight. Any conflicts of interest? To be clear. Okay, we'll move right into the staff report.
So I was just gonna give a very brief background on this, and then, well, probably about a 3 or 4 minute background, and then I'll kick it over to Kate Rogers. And so, as some of you will remember, probably about 4 to 6 years ago, somewhere in that range, the city started receiving a lot of legal challenges to land use applications and decisions. And a lot of those challenges were coming from attorneys from the Portland area. And most of the challenges had to do with our code not being what's considered clear and objective. It also had to do with things like the transportation system plan and the parks master plan not being properly incorporated into our code. So as you'll see before you tonight, the majority, the thrust behind why we've decided to undertake this is to address those concerns from those applicants and those applicants' attorneys. What was happening 4 to 6 years ago is we were getting a bunch of appeals making their way up through the city to the council. And then we had, I think, 3 or 4 different land use decisions actually get appealed to LUBA, which is the Land Use Board of Appeals of the state of Oregon. Thankfully, all 3 or 4 of those got put on what's called stays. So as soon as they got to the land use board, their attorneys filed something to just basically say, we're going to keep it here in case we need to go forward with this appeal process. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to work with the local jurisdiction and see if we can resolve it before we actually go through the whole appeal process with the state. Thankfully, I think it was 4 of them, all of those came to a conclusion at the local level, which is what LUBA wants anyways. So none of them actually were heard by LUBA. But in reaction to that, we decided to undertake this project. We put out, I think, an RFQ. We had several different firms submit proposals on assisting us. We selected MIG APG as we felt that their proposal was the top. And I've been very delighted to work with Kate and Kathy and a few other junior staff members over the last couple of years. It's been a long process. As you can imagine, and as you heard at the different work sessions we've had on the clear and objective audit, it's a very complicated ordeal to look through an entire code. I think it's 300 pages about, and actually go line item by line item and try to decipher whether different sentences and different definitions are clear and objective. It's a very difficult task. And what I will say in doing that is you also start to realize that it's kind of an impossible task, because when you change something to like from a standard that says the city encourages, or the city, like an applicant should, if you change that to the city requires or an applicant shall, you're making a policy decision, as we've talked about in the past. So there's a lot of instances throughout all these code provisions, which Kate will also highlight, is that we had to basically make a policy decision. And so on a lot of those, we actually, if you'll remember, we brought those before the Planning Commission and City Council over the course of, I think, 3 work sessions. And we discussed, you know, which way would you like to lean, or would you like to go on these policies? In addition to that, I know Kate will go into this in a lot more detail, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but we also started looking at different House and Senate bills that were passed over the last few years. As most of you in the room and online realize, there's been a lot of legislation by the state of Oregon, way more so than my tenure in local government before this. And so I think we are even having trouble just kind of keeping up with it as we were going through the clear and objective audit. So we added a lot of that information to the code as well, which Kate will go into more detail on. And then there's a few other smaller things that were also modified, such as the food and beverage card section of the code. So with that, did you have anything else to add, Patrick?
Dark sky,
Oh, dark sky, yeah.
but wasn't the TSP was a large part too, because it was recently passed and never really incorporated.
That's very true. Yeah. So if you remember when the TSP came before the commission, you recommended approval to the council. The council ended up passing the transportation system plan. As part of that work, coincidentally, APG, who's with the same firm that Kate is with, they were actually already working on code edits. So those have been there for a little while now, but we're incorporating them in with this round of the clear and objective audit as well. So yeah, great point, Patrick. With that, I'll hand it over to Kate.
All right, thank you, Kelly. I do have some slides, just some kind of background information to add on to what Kelly shared already. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what it means to be clear and objective and why it's important and all those good things and other things that we addressed through the project. So as Kelly shared, the main purpose of this project is to ensure that Sandy's development code is consistent with state laws and statutes. And primarily we were looking at the requirement that procedures, standards, and conditions all be clear and objective when they're applied to housing. So all housing development needs to have a clear and objective path to development. And that's outlined in Oregon Revised Statute 197A.400, which is actually a renumbered section of the ORS. And I'll talk about in a minute how we need to update some of those references in the code package. So that's the requirement in that section of the statute. There are some limited exceptions to that requirement for clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures, including within historic districts, but that exception didn't really apply in Sandy. And another component of this requirement is that regulations can't discourage needed housing through unreasonable cost or delay. So in the process of making your code clear and objective, and adopting regulations for housing, you can't make those regulations so strict or so onerous that it would make housing development much more expensive than it would be otherwise. So I mentioned that the ORS, some of the sections of the ORS have been renumbered, which is very aggravating when you've memorized a lot of those numbers over the last 5 to 10 years. But so before the city council hearing, before that packet is released, we will go through and just update all those references so they're current, and hopefully they won't change for at least a little while. All right, so for folks not familiar yet with what clear and objective regulations are, so these are standards that use terms and definitions and measurements that provide for consistent interpretation of the standard. So there would be no ability or need for a reviewer to use any discretion or kind of decision-making or discretionary decision-making, I should say, in applying the standard. And so there's no kind of interpretation, there's no gray area. So two people reviewing the same application and the same standards would come to the same conclusion, the same result. And this also has the benefit to applicants of kind of creating a simplified review process, saves time and money. And that's really the purpose of this requirement for housing, is to save time and money and get housing permitted more quickly to meet our housing needs in the community. And it increases the certainty of approval for applicants. But there's also benefits to staff, because staff have a much more clear kind of decision path to, does this application meet the standard or does it not? It should be kind of a black and white yes or no answer. And that makes it easier for staff, and they don't get into these kind of debates about whether something complies or not. So the statute also allows cities and jurisdictions to have an optional discretionary review path. So you have to have the clear and objective path. You can also have this optional path that allows for kind of more flexibility and some discretion on the part of the decision maker. So with a clear and objective path, again, that would require no interpretation of the standard, and the discretionary path. With that option, the applicant would need to kind of make the case for why their proposal meets the requirements. Either it's consistent with the purpose for the standard, or it meets kind of a broader guidelines. Things like, is this compatible with adjacent development, or does it meet the intent of the Sandy style design guidelines, things like that. So again, this can offer more flexibility, but it also gives some more discretion to the reviewer to decide, whether it meets the criteria or not. And so Sandy's code provides several different discretionary paths, from on the smaller end via adjustments, and to the larger end through variances. There are different kinds of variances in the code. Then we also incorporated kind of a new, it's not its own kind of review process, but it's an option as part of design review to request a design deviation. So if you have a proposal that would be challenging to meet the clear and objective standard, or you want to propose something that's a little bit different that still is consistent with the intent, but doesn't strictly meet the standard, then you can propose a design deviation and have that flexible option. So that's the crux of the clear and objective work that we did. And, we reviewed multiple chapters of the development code and made a lot of changes. And there were some kind of, I think our primary objective was to stay kind of quote unquote policy neutral, and to kind of to make sure that the outcomes of a development would be consistent with how they are in the current code, but just through a more clear and objective manner. But as Kelly mentioned, that was not always possible. And there were places where we had to kind of make some decisions and seek direction from you all and from City Council to kind of guide us in those areas. So in some cases that led to a little bit less flexibility. And so that's kind of a trade-off of sticking to state requirements. And then to just quickly run through the other changes that are included in this code package. So Kelly mentioned that there's been a whole slew of state legislation related to housing over the last several years. And so some of the House bills and Senate bills that we addressed in this project were House Bill 2583, which eliminates occupancy limits for a dwelling based on familial or non-familial relationships. So you can't limit who can, occupy a dwelling unit together if they're not, technically related on the basis of, blood relationships or marriage or adoption, things like that. House Bill 4064 had to do with manufactured housing and prohibits cities from subjecting manufactured homes to any standards that wouldn't also apply to site-built homes. So to kind of make it more straightforward for manufactured homes to be built and not kind of discriminated against. And that's for manufactured homes that are sited on a single lot. So it wouldn't apply to a manufactured dwelling park. Different kind of requirements can apply there. There were several laws related to affordable housing that require cities to allow, to have no choice but to kind of permit a development if it meets certain criteria in the city. And one of those would require the city to allow affordable housing on kind of a wide range of sites based on zoning as well as ownership. And it also allowed height and density bonuses in residential zones. Again, there are specific criteria that would need to meet that for that project to be approved, but again, the city is kind of unable to deny an application if it meets all those requirements. Same goes for properties that are owned by a religious nonprofit organization. That's House Bill 2008. Because kind of a different set of criteria, but similar in that, any applicants would have to provide housing units that are affordable to households earning a certain income level. And that one, there's, some other standards that I won't get into the details here, but has to be owned by a religious nonprofit organization. And then House Bill 3395 from last year also added another kind of path for affordable housing developed on commercial properties. And that was kind of a more narrow, it sort of overlapped with Senate Bill 8, but had kind of a more narrow applicability. And then in addition to those statutory requirements, we also have the dark sky ordinance updates, which were mentioned already. So there are a lot of references to that chapter of the municipal code in the development code. And so because there are a lot of those references, those need also to be clear and objective. So kind of looped in that section. And there were also some requests to address LED lighting, which wasn't at all mentioned in the current code, and then laser light displays, just to make sure those are kind of factored in. There was a request from city staff to add an exception to tree removal permit requirements for parks maintenance. This is not something that really was directly related to clear and objective or the other work, but this is kind of something that's come up over the years. So this allows the city to not have to go through the process of requesting a tree removal permit and having that reviewed through other departments in the city. And there are already exceptions for infrastructure maintenance. And so this would just kind of add another exception for parks maintenance. The transportation system plan implementation, as Kelly and Patrick mentioned, that was something that you all completed last year. It was adopted, and there are several recommendations for code updates. We wanted to incorporate those into the clear and objective project to make sure those are also clear and objective. So we included that. And then the food and beverage cart updates, just another kind of separate project that made sense to kind of loop it into the same code package. So that's the overview of everything that's in the 300 plus pages in your packet. There was one written public comment that the city received, and this person was commenting on the Senate Bill 8 section about affordable housing, which is in the new proposed chapter 17.88. And it requested kind of expanding the eligibility of these allowances for affordable housing. So currently, there are kind of two paths to eligibility. There's one, if the property is owned by a public body or a religious nonprofit organization. And the other path is if it's zoned for commercial use, for religious assembly, or as a public use. So the commenter was requesting that the ownership criteria, which is currently limited to a public body or religious nonprofit, be expanded to include any nonprofit or for-profit agency or company. And city staff's response is really just that the eligibility criteria are already outlined in state statute. And the scope of that eligibility is already pretty broad. And the scope of this project was really limited to implementing those state requirements. So the recommendation is not to kind of go beyond that as part of this project. If you all are interested in expanding eligibility for that program, that is something that you could consider as part of a separate project, but that would be kind of have a broader, would necessitate a broader policy discussion about how you would want to apply that. So suggestion is to keep the criteria as currently drafted. All right, I think that's my last slide.
And I was just gonna add also that as part of this project, because there's the potential to get a Measure 49 claim. So whenever there's the potential to receive one of those, you have to do what's called a Measure 56 notice, which you're sending it to all the property owners within a specific zone. Because we changed so many things with this clear and objective code audit, we decided just to send a notification by mail to every single property owner in city limits. Now, in saying that, I don't believe that the majority of those people that receive notice would have a legitimate path to getting a Measure 49 claim, a successful one at least. However, we just wanted to be on the safe side and mail it to everybody in city limits. So if you own a property in the city of Sandy, you received a letter probably. And so that went to every single property owner in city limits. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that we took actually the widest approach we could and just put everybody into that category of receiving notice.
Was there any feedback on that? or-
Just the one letter. We did get maybe, how many phone calls did you
I
get?
got like 3.
Okay. I got maybe 5 or 6, and I think Rebecca and Jan at the front counter, I think they got probably more than us. I think they got probably a dozen or 2 dozen, maybe. A lot of people just had questions around what it really meant. It was really difficult, and I'll say really difficult to create, and Kate helped with this, create a 2-page notice that covered all the legal statutory requirements and tried to also explain what this 300-page project entailed. It was basically impossible to do that. So we tried our best. Most of the people that did call were just wondering what the letter really meant. And unfortunately, unless you probably have a background in planning or have went through a lot of different land use application processes, it was probably a slightly confusing just because there was some technical terms and stuff in there, but we tried our best to get it to everybody.
Chair. Commissioner Lee has her hand up.
Thanks for catching that. Commissioner Lee.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that there are several more bills going through the legislative session between February 5th and March 10th. So I'm hopeful that any of those that pass could still be incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just so you're aware that the city council dedicated X amount of funds for the project. I think we've pretty much used all the money. And so I appreciate Commissioner Lee's comment there, because there is going to be more passed, and I'm sure next year there'll be even more passed. So, we've kind of talked about it internally that I think we're going to try to have somebody like, we probably will hopefully have MIG kind of take a look at our code more often, maybe every year or two, and suggest edits based on new legislation. It's really difficult for Patrick and I, just 2 people, to keep up on that in addition to all our other work. And Kate and Kathy have such a knowledgeable understanding of all the new legislation that's coming out that, they're helping other communities. So I think Commissioner Lee's comment is really valuable, and I don't want to lose sight of it. I don't think if any legislation passes, it will change what you have tonight, just because we're kind of at the end of the project. But I do want to just make sure you all know we are going to try to go moving forward, be updating the code more often to speak to that legislation.
Can I also add that oftentimes the statute will say, you're not necessarily required to update your code to comply with this statute. There are some things that your local code does need to be consistent with state statute, but in other cases, the statute applies regardless of whether your code is consistent with it or includes it. So that is kind of, gives the city a little leeway to make decisions about when it wants to incorporate statutes or not. It is very helpful if an application comes in and you have to interpret state statute, which is not always very clearly written or easy to interpret, as I can attest to. It's a lot more, it's very helpful to have it in the local code where you've decided, oh, maybe we can reword this, or we've gone through the process of interpreting it and understanding what it means. Makes it a lot easier on staff and if an application comes in, but you're covered still legally if the statute says it applies directly regardless.
Anything else from staff? All right, well, we will move into public testimony. And for this, we will, because of the nature of the hearing tonight, we'll just kind of leave it open for proponent, opponent comments and so forth. I don't know that we'll get a lot, but again, to repeat that if you're on Zoom, click the raise hand button to speak. And if you're on the phone, it's *9 and then wait to be recognized. So this is a time for public comment on these code changes that were in the 300 and some pages, if you had opportunity to read it. So.
You don't have to.
All right.
Let me see if any. So I don't see any hands raised online as of yet. You do have 4 people watching that could raise their hands. So I just want to give another few seconds here.
Okay.
So if anybody online, Amy, Barb, Katie, or Peggy, if you would like to speak, now is the time to raise your hand. Oh, okay, I have one person. This is Peggy Sheehan.
Okay, when you speak, please give us your name and your address for the record. Go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
So I'm Peggy Sheehan and I work for Prestige Development that happens to own the theater in Sandy. And we are interested in trying to build some affordable housing for people that are 80% of median or less. So we're quite enthused about your changes to the comp plan to allow for affordable housing. However, we're not a nonprofit, nor are we a church-based facility. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how we would go about trying to put together affordable housing under the scenarios that you're proposing.
Okay. We won't answer your question right now. So
Great, thank you.
thank you. Anybody else?
Wait, did she have something else? She raised her hand again. Sorry, I messed something up here. Peggy, do you want to lower your hand or did you have one last thing to say? You probably still have 3 minutes. No, okay. Sure, move your hand.
All right, so no further public testimony. We can go ahead and close the public hearing because we don't need to keep it open because we're free to talk to staff. So we'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
I second.
If somebody has to first, I can't make a motion.
That we close the public hearing.
I'll second again.
I look forward to that opportunity. but- Okay, been moved and seconded to close the public hearing at 7:16. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Discussion. I don't know how each of you may have tackled this. So I thought what we'd do is we just read through the whole 300 some pages word by word, and in case you didn't do your homework, you know.
You're really trying to blow my budget out of the water. Huh?
Yeah.
Kate and Kath are gonna have to sit until like 3 in the morning.
What I did, and y'all give me your input. Here's what I just made page numbers and comments on a sheet. Thought maybe what we could do is we'd say, okay, first 25 pages or first 50 pages, who's got a comment, so that we don't end up going to the end, to the back, to the beginning, and all over. Would that work? See mostly nods. Now, when I did mine, and you, for the pages, there's 2 pages. There's the page number in the little box in the lower right, and then there's the page that's in the actual code. So we're gonna go by the page number in the actual code thing. It'll say at the bottom, like I see page 1 of 296. That's what we'll go for. So who had any and these can be comments, questions, suggestions. What does this mean? Ideas, anything. Let's go with the first 25 pages.
Sound like you might have had some, Chair.
Yeah, I've got something. I've got it, but mine, I got to get through. This thing doesn't scroll super fast. Mine started in the definitions. My
Oh,
first-
yes, the section that most people don't read, but it's very important.
And my first one was just an observation. And that was the definition of congregate living states that it is a structure. And that just threw me. It's on page, well, I didn't write the page number for that. But it's-
15.
15 or packet page 30.
Thank you.
I also actually had a note on that one. I just didn't realize that my packet page 30 was going to turn out to be page 15. And that was just, does all congregate living have to include staff, meals, and supportive services? Like it reads? I mean, it seems like some places that are often referred to as congregate living situations don't necessarily include all 3.
Yeah. Do you want me to try to respond?
Yeah, you can. This was actually, I will say, one of the hardest things in this whole project, right?
It was,
Congregate housing
yes. I
or
would say,
congregate living, sorry.
right. And the proposal is to change it to congregate living to distinguish that it's not a type of housing that would be subject to the clear and objective requirements, because it's effectively a commercial use or something akin to a commercial use where you do have set staff or support folks that are there. It's not just dwelling units. It's, you're paying for a service. And let's see, I might have to defer to Kathy at some point.
We also have our attorney on the line too, just so you know, Josh,
Okay.
because I think he helped write this one too.
Yeah. So one of the changes you'll see is that the current definition in the code, the unedited definition is limited to persons 55 years or older or quote unquote handicapped persons. And the desire is to expand this to be any type of congregate living situation that does have these, the staff, meal prep, and other support services, which would all be found in the, 55 plus or, for people with disabilities. So that's one thing. And then this is really intended to distinguish a congregate living type situation as it's defined here from like a dormitory or other kind of situation where you would have multiple people living in it wouldn't be strictly a dwelling unit because it would have multiple, bathrooms and other facilities.
So would those fall in like the single room occupancy category then, or?
So it would not fall into the single room occupancy, because that is one of the things that a recent House bill from last year required the city to allow, which in a single room occupancy is essentially multiple kind of housing units or rooming units that share common facilities, common kitchen and or common, restroom facilities. But that type of occupancy wouldn't have support services. You wouldn't have paid staff. Well, I guess you could maybe have paid staff, but you wouldn't have paid staff and meal prep and supportive services for occupants. It's more of a straightforward, like you're renting just the room, and then you also have access to the shared facilities.
I think part of the thing is like the line between what's a single family home and what's not. There's really no line anymore. I mean, and that's intentional. You know,
Right.
with the passing of House Bill 2001 and allowing duplexes wherever you allow a single family home. And other legislation since then, like the single room occupancy legislation and House Bill 3395. It's very intentionally being done that way. I don't know, Josh or Kathy, do you have anything you want to add to this? This is one of the most confusing parts of this whole project. I will, from what I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've touched on kind of the distinction that we were trying to draw here was between congregate housing, which has staff, and single room occupancy, which looks similar but does not have staff. And so that's the, I think, the defining definition. And that's why or the distinction. That's why we were trying to adjust the definitions accordingly.
Okay, and so something like a dorm room for Sandy's next big university would fall into a third separate defined category?
Right.
Okay.
And hi, Kathy Corliss, MIG. I was just going to add that this is all very closely related to that change in the definition of family, where, you know, we could no longer specify that a family was a certain number of related or unrelated people living together. And so when that no longer serves as the sort of defining feature of a family and everything else was some form of, what shall we say, group living, then once you lose that and you say, well, you can't limit the number, can't define a family that way, or enforce a definition that does that, it then leaves us with the question mark of, well, how do you make these distinctions of a group living form of housing? And then, of course, there was then the subsequent change for SROs. So we were left trying to saying, well, what are the different ways that groups of people live together? Well, they could live together in a single family home, be they related or unrelated, as a group of people living together as a household. They can live together in a structure that might look like a single family home, but has, you know, more bedrooms, is bigger, has staff, and maybe that qualifies under a different type of housing, or maybe that is that type of living, but doesn't have all of those ancillary services. And so, you know, that's a different category. So trying to think about the different ways that groups of people might live together and trying to be inclusive and non-discriminatory in those categories, but to also kind of identify how they might fit then in the various land use districts, zoning districts. So I think that's what we were trying to do. If anybody's seeing any gaps or holes in that, it would be good to hear those. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move along. You need to jump in to
And just so you know, too, I was just gonna have one final little thing on this. One of the reasons we remove like 55 years or older handicapped persons, that sort of stuff. The department development services also oversees like half of the code enforcement in town. There's no way for us to monitor or to make sure that that's being followed. We also wouldn't want to be involved in that. Like, we wouldn't want to say, oh, you're only 54 years old, sorry. So if you see that in other places within the code where we've taken out things like that, that's the reason why. It's because we don't enforce it and we have no plans to enforce it.
Okay. All right, that was page 15 or 30. My next one is on page 19. Does anybody have one earlier than that? 19 is 34. Okay, and I hate to do this. We probably all have comments that relate to the existing code that wasn't touched. But, you know, having to read 300 pages, we just saw things. On this diagram at the top of the page with building elevations facing and visible from public streets. My question is just looking at it in building 4, the one smack in the middle, why the right side is not facing a street? The left side is.
I don't know. I didn't create this diagram, but it's a very good observation.
Now, I'm wondering if it's because building 3, you know, drops down over it. Again, it's just an observation for the question. I look at it, that's interesting.
Seems like something might be missing because there's numbers in the diagram, but then there's no reference to those numbers anywhere.
This is a question for our attorney, Josh. Do you think it would be better to just remove this diagram altogether? Like, do you think it's helping us in any way to have this in addition to what the actual text says, or do you think it's potentially problematic and we should just remove it?
I often find illustrations like this helpful in explaining the definitions and illustrating them. But I do agree that it seems like that, unless we're all missing something, it seems like there's an error in this diagram. That V should be an F.
Yeah, my only thought is that upper corner of 4 wouldn't be facing the street because the building's in the way. And maybe that's why it's not facing. I'll let you guys deal with that one. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see that in the definition. So if that's the distinction that it's trying to draw, we should incorporate that into the definition as well. But I would be surprised if the illustration was intended to be that nuanced.
Catherine, you have your hand up.
Only to suggest that we could take a closer look at that. It's possible that the code itself that this is referencing has a standard that says something about a building that has a front and back facing 2 different streets only has to apply the facing standard to one facade. I don't know. I have seen that sort of thing before, but perhaps if we could take a closer look at that and just make sure that if it is inconsistent, we could either, if we had a way to edit it, we could edit it before it goes to City Council or delete it as was suggested if it's not editable. I don't know if that's something that we could, it seems like we should check to make sure we're not creating a problem by changing it, but don't know if that would be helpful.
Okay.
We'll take a look.
That was page 19 or 34. My next one is on page 22. Anybody have one before that? 22, definition of grove. Why is it only native trees? Stand of 3 or more native trees. So if we had a stand of 3 or more trees that weren't native, and I don't know my native species, but I know it'd be something that's not a fir or a cedar, would we say, well, that's not a grove?
Yeah. I think it's probably referenced in chapter 17-102, the urban forestry section. In that section, it does say that for the tree to be a viable candidate, I believe it has to be native. So I don't know if that's where it's coming from. We could take more of a look at that though, and
It's actually not in that section.
it's not in that section.
It's referenced in several other sections and within design standards and in the flood hazard. You need to include tree grows in your plans, your existing conditions plans.
Oh, so in that case, it wouldn't be limited to native then.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It depends on what the intent is.
Well, y'all can work on that one too.
I can see how if it's, you need to plant or include a grove that we want it to be native trees, but if it's referencing existing trees.
That's what I'm thinking too. Like if you, that's exactly what I was thinking.
That's
If
kind of
you're-
what I assumed.
Yeah.
I was looking at existing things, trying to keep a grove. Okay. That was page 2237. Right, this one is right on 23. Top diagram. Okay, now. Now what I wrote down isn't holding water. And that was my comment was the building height. The picture doesn't show an eaves overhanging, but that does not, well, no, it does. The height is halfway between the end of the roof and the ridge. Does that include an overhang, an eaves overhang, which would actually add more length? But the picture shows to the wall point. That makes sense to anybody? Maybe it's never been a problem.
Yeah, how the picture is showing it is how we measured it for at least the last 13 years
Okay,
is to, it's it's basically from the roof plate to the peak.
okay.
Are you saying that maybe we should add more context to that? You actually say roof plate?
No,
No?
if that's the way it's been handled.
That's the way it looks to me in the picture. So as long as that's the way that
Yeah.
we've been doing it, we want to do it, then that's
Right.
I think the confusing part for me comes on the other side where it says Eve and it points to that exact same spot, but there's not.
Really neat.
Yeah, not really kind of any sort of overhang there. So is it, when you kind of measure that other side, is it meaning that you want to start at the lowest point of the Eve or the plate? But I read that's the plate, and I think that's clear, and if that's what we're doing, then I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a weird diagram. It also like on the flat one it has stories for some reason, but on the other ones it doesn't. Like, I don't know why that's relevant. To have stories shown on one but not on the other ones. I don't know.
Okay. Y'all jump in if you've got things on any of the pages that I'm
My next one's not till 32.
okay. I'll move along because my next is 24. This diagram. Hey, thanks for coming. I was going to tell you to feel comfortable leaving in the middle of this. We fully understand it, but
It's good to hear.
yeah, well, come on back. Do it again. My observation here was page 24 of that diagram, and it has impervious surface and pervious surface. my note to myself was, well, some of those surfaces could be pervious. Like the impervious. Why does the parking area have to be shown as impervious? It was just an observation.
I think it's a poor diagram and should be taken out. I think this diagram was probably made before impervious surface asphalt or concrete was a popular. This looks like a very old diagram to me. I actually think now that you pointed out, Chair, I think it should be taken out. Because you can also do green roofs now. So you could potentially have pervious surface on top of the roof as well.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's an outdated example that needs to just go. Personally.
Okay. I've done the first 25 pages. Make sure I'm looking for raised hands of others. My next one is 26. Not lot line is what I wrote. Oh, maybe it's. Okay, yeah, this is the definition, not the picture. In the case of an interior lot, a property line that abuts the street. In the case of a corner lot, one transit street, the lot line abutting the transit street shall be the front lot line. Okay, pursuant to, that's what I was thinking. I was remembering the homes that were put in on DeBarco, kind of west of Langen Sand there. And other places where we have them, the transit street is DeBarco, but we're actually looking at the back of houses. What's that street that comes up there? I forget. So I think it's.
Oh, are you talking about Timberline Estates?
I don't know them by their.
Like Wall Street? Is it where Van Tassel is?
Yes.
Yeah, I know where you're talking
Where
about.
that comes up.
Mhm.
So that what we say that that would be an interior lot to that development, property line that abuts the street. In the case of a corner lot, okay, those would be corner lots.
So those particular, so that subdivision was done right before I started here, and that was done with the plan development.
Mhm.
And they had a variance to the transit orientation. And because of that, I believe the commission or the city council, I think it was the commission, required like the nicer fencing with the vegetative screen also. The code, as it was written at the time and as it's written still, would require those houses to face the Barco Road unless they got a variance.
Okay. Yeah, that's just been an awkward one over the years, especially in that, the topography there was, the DeBarco was above the backyards.
Right.
It's very strange.
Okay. My next one is page 30 or .45. And okay. On the record was removed.
Yeah, that was removed by our attorney.
Well, then I can't question it.
Josh, did you want to just give like a quick recap of why you thought that should be removed, if you remember?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now, still scrolling. Here,
I believe that was one that you had recommended removing.
I'm not, did you say page 35? I'm not seeing it there.
It's page 30. of the printed or 45 of the report
30, 45, got it.
at the top.
Oh, right, yeah. So on the record is more of a legal concept than a term that is used in the city code. And I think we actually found that term was not, I think it was only used once, if I'm recalling correctly, in the city's code. And so we just,
Okay,
it's rather than defining a term that's used once, we just incorporated that language into the operative section of the code. If I recall correctly, that was the thought process there.
Makes sense.
explains it.
Thank you.
Next page. Pathway. Pathway. It's all blue, so it's new text. References at the end, the SMC. Is that defined someplace parenthetically, or
The SMC.
I know what it is, but is it in the definitions? At this point, I wasn't going, at home, I didn't want to scroll all the way back up and then lose my spot.
I don't know if that would be in the definition section. I think that would be in the like one of the charging sections at the beginning, like 1702 or 1706. That's where it should be referred to, but we can double check that.
Yeah, it's just, all of a sudden I'm reading along and here comes these three initials that you and I know what they mean, but somebody else reading it, and I'm thinking the whole time, clear and objective.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
It just stands for some more code, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Aaron, you had something. What was your page?
The next one, 32.
Commissioner Lee, you have your hand up. Sorry, I missed it. Go ahead, Commissioner Lee. I heard you weren't hearing me too well.
I just want to do a placeholder when we get to page 82. That's where I have my question.
Okay.
So continue on with yours, and when we get to 82.
Is that 82 in the code pages or the packet page? Packet page?
It's in the packet page in the little box.
Okay. What page was yours on, Darren?
3247.
Okay, go ahead.
Just with primary entrance, I was curious if it was only referring to commercial buildings or if it also applied to residential, just because it used the word typically.
It does refer to residents and visitors. Primary entrances typically emphasized over other entrances. Yeah. That's a good call out. I mean, I think we were kind of describing something that doesn't need to strictly be true. It doesn't have to be emphasized over other entrances by architectural features, but it often is. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to define primary entrance without saying that it is emphasized, without saying that it has to be something. Sure. So really, you're getting into standards in that case. Like, I mean, there are requirements in the design review chapter around primary entrances. Of course, that's why we have added a definition. I might see if Josh or Kathy have comments on this. Maybe from Josh, if you have concerns about using the word typically in this definition.
This is a really interesting one. Like you said, it's almost impossible to define a primary entrance. And I think the way that is phrased, typically emphasize, it's not binding, it's kind of illustrative. because it doesn't require it to be emphasized architecturally.
If I might add, I think
Yeah,
that the standards themselves are clear and objective as they relate to entrances for residential development. And this, again, is not a standard, it's a definition. To the extent that, I guess if the Planning Commission were concerned that this sentence were creating some discretion, which I don't think it is, because again, it's not suggesting or saying that they should be emphasized or in any other way being an enforceable standard, where staff could say, well, they're typically, you know, emphasized, you didn't do that in your development, so therefore this isn't the primary entrance. And I guess that would be where you would be like, okay, are we introducing discretion through the definition, kind of through the back door? If there's concern that we could delete that sentence, it still is, the true part is it's a building entrance accessible to building users, including employees, customers, residents, and visitors. In other words, it's not the employee entrance only, it's where the customers are entering, if it's a retail building, for example. So we could certainly, I think, get rid of that sentence if it's not helpful, and if you feel that it is introducing a question of discretion. I don't think that it is, but if there were concern, I don't think it's essential. Josh, any thoughts on that? Do you think it's better without?
I mean, I think it clearly just more clearly describes what a primary entrance is with it. However, I mean, as long as there's not a anything that goes back to it that's going to like contradict, we don't have anything that says that, you know, a primary entrance has to have these things, then I think it's fine. But if we do have anything that says a primary entrance has to have these things, I think it'd be contradicting, and I think we should remove it in that case. But otherwise, I would think it would be fine as it is not later in the code.
yeah. So I'm looking at how we've used that term in the code. And so, for example, and on page 120 of the packet, requires that the primary entrance of residential developments adjacent to a boulevard are oriented toward the boulevard street. And so there's a need to be able to determine which or what is the primary entrance for applying that standard. I think we might want to take a note of this issue and discuss at a staff level if there's a better solution.
See that if somebody reads that, the primary entrance has to face the boulevard. Well, what's primary entrance? They're going to go here and they'll get a, well, it could maybe look like this. Okay. No further comments on that one. I've got something on 33. This is oh, okay. So it's hard to see. I wrote, why does the recreational vehicle area of special flood hazard has bullets, but the recreational vehicle above it doesn't, and it says the same things. See what I mean? The definition of recreational vehicle says it's a unit built on a single chassis, either self-propelled or towed, lists things in narrative text. The very same thing below it has not bullets, they're letters. And I just was curious why.
Yeah, that was a request from FEMA about 2 or 3 years ago to add recreational vehicle distinctive just to the area of special flood hazard. And then that was their exact A, B, C, D that they wanted added. About every 8 to 10 years, we get a request from FEMA to update our FSH section.
Hmm.
Got one probably about 2010, 11, and then we just got one in 2019, 20. And so they add a bunch of stuff that arguably I think is probably not necessary, but they really want it to be added, so we just add it. And historically, that's what we've done. So that anybody that is getting a flood insurance, so that their flood insurance is not void or doesn't become more complicated if our code doesn't speak to it the right way. That's what I can say on that. So there's other things in the FSH section, if you look at it, that were different in like 2018, and they had little tweaks that they had requested that we make. So we made them.
Could you get away with just putting them in a like paragraph above? Or do we have to use the letter points? It's the same type of wording. Just the one above is separated with commas. It's like I say, it's a design thing.
I think they're a little bit different actually.
Well,
'Cause
it's
the one has 400 square feet, the other one doesn't.
Right,
Yeah, I
but
don't-
it's the same idea. It's one's a paragraph, the other one's listed a mile.
I mean, we could, yeah. We get rid of the A, B, C, D and just make them into commas.
I guess I have a little bit of OCD in me.
I mean, we could do that. It would take a few minutes, right?
Probably less.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Hey, you gain about 4 lines in the document. If we keep it up, we might be down a page or 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be very honest. A few of the changes they had for us last time, I was like, okay, but at the same time, like I said, we didn't really want to risk anything with,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, we just complied and did what they
Yes,
asked.
no, I understand. Okay. I'm moving on to 37. What was yours next one?
Oh, it's a while. It's like a hundred and something.
37. I'm sorry, I'm the only one doing that.
I have one, Jerry.
Oh, good.
On, well, nothing exciting, but on 35.
35,
Mhm.
35 code page.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, the COPA, shared use path. So question on that is, shared use path can be for recreational and commuter needs. Now, is there shared use paths that are currently trails that are specifically for bikes and or for pedestrians? And how is that told to the people that are going to be using those particular paths?
That one has the SMC too.
Mhm.
Some more
I know,
code.
I guessed on that one. I didn't know what that was, but I'm sure I could figure it out. But do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just thinking of this, Cedar Park will have this pathway that, and is it going to be bikes and is it going to be pedestrians both on it? And is that, and because I don't know if it's going to be wide enough for both, as you have in some other cities that, accommodate both. So I'm just wondering if that is meant to be a path for anyone. If it's for recreation, is it a path for walkers, runners? Is it a path for bikes? Is it a path for what? Because it's going to be a shared use path for recreation.
Yeah, so a shared use path in this context would be distinctive and different from a sidewalk.
Yes.
But otherwise, yeah, it doesn't, I guess the individual paths would have to be signed as such.
Yes. Okay.
Like, I don't, I've lived here for a while and I don't even know, is Tickle Creek Trail technically for both bike
I
and
don't know that
pedestrian?
either. I was thinking
I
about
don't
that
know.
because I've never seen people go on bikes on it, but I don't
I
know.
mean, my
Yeah,
kids have, but they're
bike
like
all the
little,
time. Yeah. I haven't seen horses. I've seen
It's recreation
Yeah.
too.
dogs.
Okay,
I think it's actually like, just so you know, I think on a sidewalk, if there's an alternative path like a bike lane, then you're not supposed to legally ride on the sidewalk. However, if it's like little kids, nobody typically cares. They don't want them down the street.
Right.
This is a little bit different, but again, I think it would just have to be dictated by individual signage.
signage, okay,
I think so.
all right.
Yeah, I
And
don't-
and kind of regarding the Cedar Park, it's going to be a bike park next to a trailway. So there is going to be a lot of access for bikes to hop on that path that could be more pedestrian oriented or not. I don't know what it's meant, but I would think that part of the, these park is going to be for bikes and the other part would be for pedestrian, but I'm not sure based on that.
Yeah, we currently don't, not to my knowledge at least, we currently don't have any pathways in Sandy that are bike only. Now that will change with the pump track and some of the, so we will have that now.
And come to think of it, I don't think on the Tickle Creek Trail, since I live on it, I don't think there's any signs that would prevent a motorcycle from going on. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody, but there's nothing that would keep them from just popping off the street and going on it. But I don't think I've ever seen it.
Is that city or county?
Okay.
It's a good point. I just don't know if,
So they will be signed is what you're saying.
I don't know if they will be,
Okay.
because I
Okay.
don't run the Parks and Rec,
Oh,
but
gotcha.
I think it's something worth considering, because I think you're correct. Otherwise, I think the more likely scenario is that a pedestrian is gonna be concerned getting hit by a bike,
Exactly.
right? I mean, I
Yes.
think so.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it would be wise for them to, I'll mention it to the Parks and Rec
Okay.
director. That's a really good point.
My next one is on 37, and I think you answered it, Kelly. It's the start of construction, and then what is the area of special flood hazard? So that probably came from FEMA,
Yes, it did.
okay. And
It's a very
apparently-
long definition too.
Yeah, but apparently we don't need a definition of start of construction for other things.
No, and because that would be dictated by the building division program of the state that we use.
Okay, on the next page. Right there at the top, B. The ADT. Is that defined?
Average daily trips
Right, but is
or traffic, I think.
that just
I think it is.
everybody reading the code is going to understand what it is? Or is that something that would make sense in the definitions?
I can jump in. There is a definition in the A section for
Oh, good,
average daily traffic ADT.
good. Like I said, I wasn't scrolling back.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
That was added after actually Shailene Meadows.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question on that same page. It's the cul-de-sac.
Oh, yeah.
That code was changed, it looks like. What would stop a developer from coming in? And if a cul-de-sac is defined as a local street with only one outlet having a bulb at the opposite end, whereas before it was not to exceed 400 feet, is that something they could get around and build a huge, if they did the street, the cul-de-sac, by this definition, a certain way, that could change really what the neighborhood would look like?
The answer is likely no, because in 17-100, we added a new section for cul-de-sac standards. And when we get down to there, we can go through that if you
Yeah.
like. Before, the only thing for cul-de-sac standards is really this definition. We are having a lot of issues with cul-de-sacs being overly used, and then we struck them from the code entirely until we had more chance. I think we talked about them at a commission meeting at one point.
Yeah, Shelley.
Shelley did, and then we've added them back into the code in 17-100. So when we get down there, we can
Okay.
take a look at that.
Thank you.
But yes, otherwise it would.
Okay.
Okay, Catherine.
Yes, and I was just going to jump in to say our general practice is to recommend taking standards like that out of your definitions and not trying to regulate by your definitions in the sense of having a standard like that, putting that in the chapter or the section that applies standards to, for example, cul-de-sacs. So not to try and put those in the definitions themselves because it gets very confusing for the applicant and staff.
Thank you. 42 is my next one. 42 in the code. Diagrams don't show a lot with a street on front and rear. All the examples. There's no example of a lot that has a street on the front and the rear. The closest one, I don't know that it's necessary for the purpose of these charts. But what if you had, and I don't know if we've got places like that, but a street on the front and the back of a lot. Generally, we have another lot there. You know?
My lot's like that in Sandy.
Oh,
I have a through lot.
okay.
They're not allowed.
Oh,
That's why there's no diagram for them, because they're not permitted
okay.
unless you get a variance.
All right. Check that one off.
But there are examples of them out there yet, like mine.
Okay. 44, page 44. Something, Jared, because I've got. All right, 44A. Reference again, MH Parks.
Yeah, that's an that should probably be modified. Because I doubt that's defined anywhere. I could be wrong, but we could just make it manufactured home. FSH and G is defined elsewhere.
Okay. I jumped to 55E. Did you use before then, Darren?
No, I've got another 55 pages.
Oh, okay.
You say 55?
Yes, 55. The things you can do when the wind is blowing and the power's out. You got a good flashlight. (55E).
There's two of them. EFE.
EFE, good catch. Well, there's EFEF.
That was FEMA, right?
Yeah, good one. Yeah, I can't say they did that one.
Oh,
Good
yes.
catch though. Yeah, EFEF.
The first E. At the commencement of a hearing under a comprehensive plan or yet land use regulation, a statement shall be made to those in attendance that lists the applicable substantive criteria. We don't always do that. It's always in the staff report, but we don't always say it. And my question was, should we start doing that?
I have been trying to we've been trying to do it the last couple of years in the PowerPoints.
Okay.
But if it is missed, it's not intentional. It's just that we forget to. And yes, I would say we should be doing that. Because that is what you ultimately are reviewing against are the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question I think is that at the beginning of the PowerPoint, is that close enough to the commencement of the hearing?
Yeah, yeah.
Or is it open the hearing, we're here to talk about this, here are the things?
That'd be a question for our attorney.
Yeah, the way that Kelly described is very typical. Rather than having the chair or whoever have to read out a long list of criteria, it's incorporated into the staff presentation.
And that's sufficient to meet what we have in our code here.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I do agree though, Chair, before about 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't do it very well. Like, we were a lot more spotty on when we did it.
Mhm.
I think we've gotten a lot better at doing that.
I know it's always in the reports and very,
Yes.
very thorough, and it's there, but we don't state it.
We didn't cover it in the presentations as good as we do now.
Mhm.
I would definitely agree.
Okay. 74 is my next one. This one was maybe more of a question. It has to do with hospitals. I think I was looking for, when I saw that they were removed, it was removed from. Which one are we looking at here? This is in SFR. When I saw it was removed from SFR, then I started looking, okay, where can you put a hospital? So that it was removed from SFO, R1, R2, and R3 as a conditional use. But it is allowable in C1, C3 village commercial. So am I getting that right? That for a hospital in Sandy would have to be in C1 or C3 village commercial unless it was conditional. Just seemed like.
I think the thinking here is that if a hospital, which is probably very low chance,
Right.
but because all they're doing right now is reducing the number of hospitals out there. But if a hospital ever did come to Sandy, we didn't think, or I don't think it's really appropriate to put it in the single family residential zone.
Mhm.
The amount of traffic alone would be very onerous on the surrounding residents for like a regional hospital in Sandy in the SFR zone.
Mhm.
Plus, I think just with like ambulances and sirens all the time, I think it would be very poor placement. And furthermore, I don't even know if because of the noise and traffic impacts, I don't think there would really be a straight-faced way of approving a conditional use permit for that use in that zone.
Mhm. It was just an observation of where it could be, and I agree that it's highly unlikely in our lifetimes.
Yeah, as typically residential zones wouldn't be appropriate for that sort of use, the hospital use. And I think the main reason is because it wouldn't, for traffic reasons, it wouldn't even be able to accommodate a hospital.
Can I ask a question? Was that intended to mean hospital or home for the aged, blah, blah, blah? Or was it hospital or home for the aged, retirement, rest or convalescent home? Because I think I had interpreted that as a hospital specifically for older folks.
I personally, I think it could be interpreted either way because it wasn't clear yet.
I see what you mean, yeah. English language. Okay, Jan, I had down page 82 and I was yours in the code, page 82 again.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to page 82. What I recall on page 82 that I had a question about is how that changes from what we're currently doing. So I should be at 82 here fairly quickly.
And And you were talking the code page 82, correct?
Right. It's just before section 17.28.50. And it adds some discussion about some verbal summaries, and I didn't know how that changes from what we're doing now, why that addition was there.
Yeah, so to answer that, Commissioner Lee, that was, I believe, added by our attorney. It's the line that says, if requested, the reviewing body shall allow the applicant or appellant to present an oral summary of the evidence and code sections that support their position. Is that the line?
Right.
Josh, could you speak to that?
Yeah, so this is when there's a, excuse me, an appeal that's on the record. And so there's no new evidence, but it clarifies that we will allow the interested parties to still get up and basically state their arguments. So that I think that's a helpful, typically for the decision maker to have that summary. And it's also helpful for the applicant and the other parties to feel like they are having an opportunity to present their best case to the appellant body.
Yeah, it seems to make sense for that change to occur.
Sorry, I got by that one. He's having 2 pages systems. It throws me off. My next one is on page 94 of the code page.
So down quite a ways.
Oh, yeah. Page.
This is in the village commercial. 1746.
Yeah, it's page 109 of the packet and 94 of the code, top line number 3. Manufacturing, assembly, processing, and production that do not produce significant levels of noise or odor. My clear and objective bell went off when I read that. It may be fine for,
It's
because it's not residential,
bingo. You answered it.
which is fine. But we're also tuned into this cleared objective that, you know, like say bells go off.
Yeah, you hit it though. That's exactly correct.
Okay. Some of these, I think I answered myself on later on. It's like, page 100, very top, Bornstead Village Overlays Park Plan. See at the top. My question myself was, does it have a specific parks plan?
The board said village overlay. It did, yeah.
Yes, okay. That answers it.
It also had a specific transportation plan, a pedestrian plan, a circulation plan, yeah. Which I think are all referenced in here. in parts.
2 more pages. On
And just so you know, just so the commission knows, is when we did update the parks master plan, we took that into consideration.
Okay, page 102. The chart at the top. I was starting to get confused between manufactured home is changed to dwelling, but on page 103, manufactured dwellings is changed to homes. You can see in the middle of that chart, one says 5-foot minimum at the top, the bottom. For manufactured home is changed to dwelling parks. Then on the next page, where did I find that?
Yeah, sub B.
B
Mhm.
says manufactured dwellings is changed to homes.
I could answer this one.
Good.
The state statute has specific definitions for manufactured dwelling, which is a more inclusive term that includes manufactured homes, as well as mobile homes and
Mhm.
residential trailers. And those three types of manufactured dwellings are all defined by the age they were built. So manufactured homes were built after 1976, and they're to the current HUD standard at the time that they were built. And then I was just working on a model code related to this, so it's all very fresh in my mind. 1962 to 1976 is mobile homes, and then pre-1962 is residential trailer. There's not as many of those out there anymore, but there are still some cool 1950s residential trailers. So the statute requires manufactured dwelling parks, and it does use that term manufactured dwelling park in state statutes. That's why that term was updated to just be consistent, and requires all three of those types of manufactured dwellings to be allowed in a manufactured dwelling park. But for manufactured dwellings that are sited that need to be allowed on a single lot, placement on a single lot, similar to a site-built home, those are referred to as manufactured homes. And so the city has to allow, essentially, not the older models of manufactured dwellings, but more current manufactured homes to be placed on single family lots or on individual lots. And those have to be they can't be subject to more restrictive standards than a site-built home.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
You would never know if you hadn't read these statutory definitions 1,000 times.
If we have more questions around that, we'll be asking Kate to present. for us.
Yeah, my head was just going back and forth. Wait a minute, wait.
Yeah, and MIG did a fantastic job of going through and looking for inconsistencies. It's definitely not my specialty, I'll just be honest. I ran manufactured homes and dwellings and trailers, and it's not my specialty. So we really relied heavily on them.
Okay, my next one was on 107 of the code.
I have one on 103.
103.
Yes.
Okay, 103 on the code.
And I think we kind of answered this earlier, but just double checking. So if we're talking about the purpose or intent of a standard, does that also have to be clear and objective, or that can be a little bit more open?
Correct.
Okay.
It can be more open.
Yeah, the intent is not a criterion or a regulation, except in one section of the code it is.
Excellent.
In 1790, 10, I think it is.
Then I can pass on that.
So 107 is our
107. Okay, and this one, again, I think we've already answered it. The reference of steep slopes. Again, it was my clear and objective bells going off, but not being residential, although we talk about steep slopes in residential. But again, this is in the intent.
Yeah, and we don't, so steep slopes are anything of 25% or greater in the code. Potentially hazardous areas. I don't really know what that means. That's why I think that was me that suggested modifying that. We've never used, like, that's not a term we use elsewhere that I'm aware of.
And is steep slopes defined in the definitions?
I don't know if it is.
I made a note to myself, says maybe explained in 1756-50 CA.
What was that? Sorry, 1756.
650 CA is where it's defined.
Yeah, 25% or greater.
Mhm. Okay, no, I mean, I'm cool. It's just, again, seeing that.
Yeah, so the more interesting part of this is actually when you go to applicability, right under that sentence you were referring to, it actually says, and this is really the important sentence, it says, these regulations shall apply to any parcel with slopes greater than 25%.
Mhm. Yeah, that's fine. Jump to 112 unless somebody's got one prior to that.
This is probably a FEMA thing.
Oh, no, this is a wording thing. Number 9.
Is it it's plural and it should be singular?
Yeah, tree groves clusters.
Tree groves clusters should be tree grove clusters.
Or tree groves, because we defined what a tree grove is.
True. I like that better. Just get rid of the word clusters. Is that what you're thinking?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, one or the other.
I like that better because we don't define tree grove clusters.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, the decision was to keep tree groves and delete clusters.
Yeah, just delete clusters, correct.
Okay, page 115. Looking for raised hands or. Okay, page 115, 1760-30. A1 says 80 feet from the top of a bank of Tipple Creek. Then when you go to the diagram in the next page, it shows in the diagram, my understanding, on the far left there where it says top of bank, and that measurement is 70 feet. Should that be 80?
It should.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So what happened is this diagram was made probably 20 years ago, about when the fish was originally
Mhm.
instated. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, sorry, the state changed the setbacks to 80 feet.
I think that's why we added in parentheses, this supersedes the setback in figure 1. That was the intention.
Did I miss that? No,
I mean,
I
it's
see it.
not the clearest thing in the world,
This
but
supersedes the setback in figure 1. Okay,
you're okay with that?
in the words of Gilda Radner, never mind.
That's actually one diagram we do use quite a bit at the front counter.
Yeah, you'd already caught that.
Sorry,
Already addressed it.
I was coughing.
Yep, she's on it. Next one, I guess. I don't have a page number for the next one, but I wrote type 1 and type 2 adjustments are removed.
Yeah, Josh, do you mind just giving a short description of why we can't have a variance or adjustment procedure that doesn't give notice?
Yeah, it's because the standards for variances and adjustments they're discretionary, or at least they're not purely formulaic, which is what you can do without notice.
So once these are adopted, you won't hear of type 1 adjustments anymore.
Jumping to page 127 in the code. Anybody have something prior to that? This would have gone a lot faster if Jerry hadn't done all this.
No, these are really helpful.
127. Where is a type 1 variance spelled out? Probably what we just looked at. Oh, yeah. No, 1766-60 says variances. And then 66-70 says type 2 and type 3 variance criteria. So my mind said, well, where's type 1? It seems to be missing.
Yeah, and there are none.
So it doesn't exist. So, okay.
I think the intention is just to say that the same criteria apply to both type 2 and type 3. That's my guess. And then there's the type 3 special variance, which it has its own set of criteria.
But there is no type 1 variance.
And even if there was, it would be going away with this clear and objective
Mhm.
for the purposes Josh just spoke to.
Page 130. Senior citizens, do we define that in the definitions in the top? Purpose? What is a senior citizen? McDonald's, it's age 55 and up, you know, for others, it's 63, some it's 65, some, does it matter?
Yeah, so the congregate living previously was restricted to people 55 and up. So that would have been the definition then. So I don't think it's intended to specify a certain age. It's most, I think the intention of modifying this was to say it's typically provided for senior citizens or people with people with disabilities. But it also says, and others living in a congregate living facility. So it's not limited by age or disability.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Page 148. Did you have anything before that?
Something fairly soon after.
Scroll.
Page 148.
Yes, 148 in the code. 50% glazing on primary entrances, door seemed high. You couldn't have a, where are we at here, Jerry? C,
The first one or the second one?
back one, primary dwelling entrance is shown visible from the street, shall include a covered porch at least 5 feet in depth. Shall be architecturally emphasized using one or more of the following features. Okay, one or more. Transom windows. These 2 ornamental light fixtures flanking the entry. A larger door. A door with at least 50%. Okay, I see now that it's like one or more of.
Yeah, you don't have to pick that
You
one.
don't have to have.
And I don't think most people would.
No.
Most of the time we see transit window is the thing we mostly see there.
You had something in the neighborhood there, Darren?
151.
I had something on 150. 150 at the bottom. What I wrote was bottom 15-foot path in cul-de-sacs, but 12 feet where it's multi-use. It seemed backwards.
Where's this one?
Okay. So at the bottom of 150. There's 12 feet and 15 feet, and I thought it was kind of backwards. Pedestrian rights of way connecting cul-de-sacs or passing through shall be a minimum of 15 feet wide. Then the next one,
Right.
12-foot wide pathway shall be provided where multi-use paths. So multi-use is bikes and people. And it's only 12 feet wide.
So the one prior to that is a 15-foot wide right away, but only 8 feet of it is paved, and the other 7 feet is landscaped. So it's
Okay.
narrower than C by, what would that be, 4 feet?
But then the next one is 12 foot, doesn't talk about paving.
And I think the reason why is because some of them in the TSP or the Parks Master Plan are actually not paved. Some of them are trails when you go into the those documents. That's actually a good point, though. I think C should be planned in the TSP or the the 2022 Parks and Trails Master Plan. Because there are some non-paved trails in that plan that are multi-use.
I.e. Tickle Creek.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's an important distinction to get in there, actually. That it's actually both of those plans. That it could be. Because there's some trails in the TSP that are not in the Parks and Trails Master Plan and vice versa. And then some that are overlapping if we're looking at shared funding for those systems. Yeah, it's actually the first time we ever did a TSP and a Parks Trail Master Plan right next to each other, like within a year of each other. So they're fully integrated into one another, like they speak to each other. We never had that before.
Okay, and you had something on 152?
Yeah, the very next item, pedestrian connectivity shall be encouraged. I mean, it then goes on to say what is the standard, but to me, the shall be just sounds rather prescriptive, considering it's what the exact term we use when we are saying what the standard is. So to me, when I read shall be, it says the standard is encouraged, the pedestrian connectivity is encouraged. But encouraged isn't necessarily clear or objective.
So I think all of number 1 under B, if you scroll back up to page 150, it says new non-residential development shall provide safe and convenient bicycle and pedestrian facilities connecting blah, blah, blah. And then everything under that is only applicable to non-residential. And then because we added a new section specific to multifamily developments, because these types of standards wouldn't apply to like a single family. They would only apply to multifamily residential.
Okay.
Yeah, so we carved out a separate section that is kind of parallel to the one above, which was the existing code that was clear and objective, that would apply to residential, and everything above that would not apply.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
my 152, just an observation. It was good to take out school bus transit requirements. I don't know. It seemed funny that it was there in the first place, because that would change with the population for one thing. Next one, mine. I jumped to 184.
I kind of just have a note, maybe for when Kelly gets back on the whole new section from like 171 to wherever that ends.
In the packet paging.
Yeah. All that new.
It's the new affordable housing chapter.
Yeah. And that is, it just does a lot of ORS 197.308 F material is allowed pursuant to, and I'm just like, am I supposed to be able to make heads or tails of this? And I realize kind of why it is the way it is, but as somebody who's supposed to be interpreting the code, like, I'll have to have like 40 Chrome tabs open and be flipping between them to figure out, you know, what applies to what and in what category. And it
Yeah.
just, it doesn't see, I mean, it's clear as in I know exactly where to go and find all the information, but it's not exactly easy.
Yeah, and is it mainly the references to the statute, to the ORS?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's just, and it's not just the one or the two, but it's like every single one of them, like, just has me bouncing around to a ton of different places.
Yeah. I understand that. I think so. Initially, this section we'd added just for Senate Bill 8, which was passed in 2021, which is now some other number. It's not 197.308 anymore, but it's in state statute now. But then in last year's legislative session, they passed another bill which overlaps with Senate Bill 8.
Right.
So you could theoretically kind of apply under both pathways, but it was really difficult to kind of integrate them into one set of criteria and standards. So we, to kind of address that, we included this applicability section A, which says, you know, if you meet the criteria for this pathway, you can choose that. If you meet the criteria for that pathway, you can choose that. If you meet the criteria for both, then you can pick whichever one you want. And so it was kind of necessary to include the ORS references just because it's defining which pathway.
Right.
it is.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand, but I'm just like, oh, if I'm trying to, like, if I have to figure out something, it's going to be, you know, bouncing around, and it's,
Yeah. I would say that folks that are applying or thinking about applying under these provisions, they're going to be familiar with the statutes. They will have been following along. Like, I mean, if you're an affordable housing developer,
Right.
you know what you're allowed to do, most likely. So you kind of already know how it works. We did intend to make it as clear as possible for staff's sake.
Yeah, it's
if for
definitely,
nothing
yeah,
else.
clear it is, easy, maybe not so much.
Totally.
But that's why we
agree.
got Patrick though, I guess, right?
What's that?
That's why we have these fine folks over here.
Yes, yeah. Kelly understands how it works, so that's all that matters.
Yeah, they're gonna have a whole new set of code to memorize.
I
now.
fake it until I make it.
Yeah, we were just talking about how all the ORS references make it really difficult to read.
Certainly do.
Okay. My next one is on page 184 of the code paging. And it was just a question, because by the time I got to it, I hadn't seen it, and that is design deviation. You mentioned that that was a new thing that was introduced. Where does that show up? Because when I got to page 184.
Yeah.
It just that, I don't know if that was the first time it popped up in my rec 184 number 5.
It's in 1790-60 C. 1790-40 C.
Type of review, yeah.
Okay. That's fine, yeah, may be approved through design deviation. And that is a separate section.
Sorry. Can't stop coughing. Feel fine too. So we did have design deviations before, but they weren't as clearly defined like this.
Now you get me coffee.
In some of the
180.
room, it's like too humid or something.
6
Too dry.
B. Pedestrian shelters in the middle of the page, and this is the 186 of the code and 201 of the packet. Features such as canopies, arcades, awnings, roofs, overhangs, covered porches, alcoves, and or porticos are required. Then D, it says shelters shall be designed with gables over building entrances. Are we talking two different things? They have to have gables. Also on page 202D. You see where I'm,
Yeah.
where it seems like it's a feature is required, but then it says you also have to have gables,
Right.
which to me is a feature.
What page are you on?
It's 186 in the code paging. In the middle, pedestrian shelters.
It's a good point. If you have an awning, could an awning have a gable? Not sure.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point of having B if you have to have a gable in D? Because you're gonna put in a gable, but now you have to add in a canopy or an arcade or an awning or a roof. I guess a roof overhang, that would count. I say, I got it. There's my roof overhang. That's my gable.
Can't you just remove shall be, go back to the way it was before? Because then it's optional.
That's true.
Well, I think that would be okay as long as it's clear that the city would not enforce it if the feature did not include a gable. We were trying to remove things like saying, certain things are preferred over other things, because that's not obviously not clear and objective. Kathy, do you have any, Josh?
Is the distinction between D and B that D only applies to entrances? And that B would also apply to ones over pedestrian areas like sidewalks?
Yeah, I think that's the intent.
There we go.
Okay.
I think it's a good point that could be clarified since we're having this conversation, but that's what I thought it was. That specifically you have to have gables over entrances, but you could use those other features over the other types of shelters.
Although it doesn't say that the gables have to be over, this is just a shelter. So is it like an open air thing?
I think this, oh, yeah, as Josh points out, this is intended to only apply to shelters that are over building entrances. So those types of shelters do need to have gables. I think if we just reordered the statement to say shelters over building entrances shall be designed with gables, I think that would clarify it.
I think that the question though is going, and maybe we need to go back and revisit the design standard, because if the design standard is that entrances, it isn't just preferred over a flat shelter over the entrance. So for example, if I have across my entire facade, an overhang that's flat or like a covered porch, do I then need to switch to a gable over the entrance? I mean, it would look nice potentially and highlight the entrance, but it, would disrupt the roof line if it's covering the entire facade with a covered porch. And so I think that we need to go back maybe and take a closer, it's a really good point, and one we should take a closer look at in the design standards, because requiring a gable over every entrance, a gable shelter over every entrance might be excessive relative to what's shown in the design standards now. So I suggest we take a close, if it's all right with the commission, we take a closer look at that and make a recommendation to the city council to change it if it looks like it's inaccurate. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
I know that most often when we dealt with pedestrian entrances, at least staff has leaned heavily towards gables. Especially if it's where Sandy style is being enforced.
Exactly right. I think it may be correct to keep it as Kate suggested, where we just reframe it as shelters over building entrances shall be designed with gables and must comply with the roof pitch standards. So that would fix the sentence. Just want to make sure that that's consistent with the Sandy style as it's described in more detail.
Mhm.
So, thank you.
It's also on page 200. Okay, it's repeated on page 200 of the code at the bottom, pedestrian shelters. So if we changed it one place, we change it the other place. Back to 187. Seven at the top. Siding shall consist of wood, composite wood, for example, concrete, fiberboard, panels, or shingles. When I read this, my note to myself was, where does hardy board fit in?
That's hardy board.
Yes, but it's funny. It says composite wood, and then in parentheses we say, for example, something that isn't composite wood. I mean,
Hardy Plank is a
concrete,
brand,
right? But it's a concrete. It's not
Yeah.
wood.
right?
It's not a composite wood product. So it appears to me that the parenthetical statement is further defining, giving examples of composite wood. Hardy plank is not an example of composite wood. See what I'm saying? That it's, and we allow it all over the place. We love it. Maybe, I don't know if we take
So you're
out,
thinking of removing composite wood and just putting,
or if you take out the EG, it just put composite wood, comma, concrete, fiberboard, panels or shingles.
Or if you take out the word wood, and you just have composite. You could have those as composite materials.
Yeah, it was, we were doing some back and forth weird examples of.
Well, yeah. Concrete fiberboard is what everybody should be putting on their house because it lasts way longer than real wood
Right.
and it doesn't get mold or mildew as easily. Composite wood is like Trex decking and that always has manufacturer recalls. So I don't know if I would proclaim to be that as good as concrete fiberboard, but we could say composite wood, concrete fiberboard. You don't need to see panels or shingles. I don't think that really does anything.
Yeah, because we're talking about siding of shingles. About the only thing for that is cedar, isn't it? Cedar shingles, which we kind of
Kind of a composite.
discourage.
Concrete fiberboard comes with shingles.
Yeah, I have
Oh,
like some
already.
kind of vinyl shingle.
The shingles outside on the south side of the building that we installed, those aren't real wood.
Oh, okay.
That's cement. That's cement wood.
Well, y'all can play with that, just that.
There's probably a repeat of this in 7 down below too.
Isn't stucco a brand
Yeah,
name too?
also on page 201 is in my notes.
That's ethos.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I would never recommend wood siding, to be honest. Not in Sandy. We have way too much moisture.
It's repeated on page 201 of the code paging, letter D. Number 1. No, letter D. Same place for you. Y'all can fix that one.
I don't think we've ever seen composite wood siding, just so you know, but I guess somebody could use it.
Sounds awful.
What's that?
Sounds awful.
It sounds really expensive too,
Yeah.
because Trex is actually very expensive.
Okay, page 198 of the code page, smack in the middle, number 8. Says if identified in the city of Sandy 2011 transportation system plan. Aren't we using 2023, or is it the reason it's?
No, it should be the updated date. Good catch. Yeah, anywhere it says 2011 transportation system plan, if it does say it anywhere else, that should be the new year.
That's what I
2023.
thought, and I think that may be the only place, I caught.
Didn't show up in our.
My control F.
Yeah, that's
Control
what I
F
was gonna
failed me.
say.
Must have been user error.
FEMA.
Okay, big deal.
Kelly, could I jump in for just a second?
Sure,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that maybe we add a definition that says transportation system plan, and then all references are to the 2023 transportation system plan. Then get rid of any date in the body of the code. And then if you have to update it later, you just have to update it in the definition. And so if there's a 2030 transportation system plan, the references to transportation system plan will all be fine. You'll just have to fix it in the one spot in the definition.
Yeah, we actually proposed that, and Josh might have a different take. We actually proposed that before when we did some code changes, and the attorneys over at Barry Elser and Hammond at the time were a little bit they were not too, yeah, because they had lost the case, I think in Silverton or something. I forget the specifics. But so that's why in a few years ago, when we redid chapter 1786, we used the year in every single, so that somebody couldn't argue that it wasn't specifically incorporated properly.
All right. Fair enough.
Commissioner Lee, got a question? Your hands up.
Yes, I didn't feel well when we started out tonight and I'm getting worse, so I think I'm gonna have to leave because it looks like we might be quite a while longer.
Okay, we understand. I hope you're not getting what you suspect.
I certainly hope not either, because I've never had it yet. But I'm gonna have to leave.
Okay, we understand. Keep us posted.
Okay.
Actually, I don't have a whole lot more. Because I think the next one I had was on 225 and it, it's already been answered sort of because it's a, doesn't relate to housing. So it doesn't have to be clear and objective, and that was significant tree specimens.
225.
225, yeah. But it's kind of a moot point now because we've already said that it doesn't have to be. It's clear on. C.
So,
Yeah, C. Significant tree specimens shall be preserved. I guess who decides what's significant and what isn't?
It's the sentence after that that defines it actually.
Oh, yeah. All right. Keep reading, Jerry. So it's significant is by the size, not the species.
Though after, we might want to just say significant trees instead of tree specimens. Because I don't know if that really adds anything, and I think it creates confusion personally. I think if we just say significant trees shall be preserved and integrated, and then it goes on to say what that means to be considered significant. I don't know. I don't think specimens, I think that's actually just creating confusion. I don't think it's adding anything good.
It's an arborist term.
Yeah. That's why you pay all that money for the report. I mean, does the commission agree with that? Getting rid of specimens and saying trees? Okay.
The next one's on the next page, but I think. This one is the, okay, the chart in the middle. Minimum landscaping refers to a manufactured home park. Is that one still legit there?
That's a good catch. Yeah, we should have changed that to manufactured dwelling park to be consistent with other changes. Thank you.
Also see.
Most of 1792, I don't think have been touched in 30 or 40 years. So there's quite a few changes in it, just wordsmithing.
Okay, that's that same manufactured home park is used on the chart on page 241.
Okay.
Has to do with parking spaces.
Unless you have anything in between that chart is my next question.
You had something in between there.
No, unless Jerry.
Oh,
No, then I jumped ahead to the other reference was 241. Which page is yours on?
241,
241?
that same chart you're referencing.
Oh, the parking one?
Yeah.
Yeah, fire away.
I was just curious why for the single room occupancy, there was a difference in the parking compared to like a studio apartment.
That was a policy question that we posed to city council and to
Okay.
planning commissioners that were there for the last joint work session. And we kind of suggested a range of options. You know, one per SRO unit was the recommended standard by council, but we also suggested that, yeah, being more consistent with the standards for studio units would be, you know, another way to go. Another kind of lesser requirement would be kind of more consistent with the congregate living, which would be 1 per 3 occupants. So, you know, something less than 1 per unit, with the idea that most SRO units will be only occupied by 1 person per dwelling, most likely. And those folks may have less car usage than kind of standard multifamily occupants.
Yeah, I remember the conversation. I don't remember exactly how it landed, but in my head, I was thinking, oh, that should be fairly similar to a studio, and probably similar arrangements. I don't know if the rest of the group feels the same way enough to make a change or leave it as is.
I think we upped it from 1 to 1.5 was what city council recommended, or what we talked about with the.
That's what I remember talking about, but like
Yeah.
I said, I couldn't remember exactly where we went.
I think we shied away from requiring 2 and kind of met in the middle at 1.5.
That was my recollection, but yeah, like I said, I couldn't
Yeah.
remember for sure.
Yeah,
And that was for what again? Which?
that was for the parking. We had that discussion when we were talking about how this multifamily dwellings could go from 28 to 14 occupancy with the new guidelines. And we wanted to make sure there was enough parking so that, because street parking can get really complicated when there was 1 requirement per unit. And if we're doubling, I think Councilwoman Walker said if we're doubling to 28, probably requiring more because we're going from 14 to 28, possibility that I think that's why we kind of decided that we would add a little bit more requirement for the parking, from what I remember.
I know I was taking notes, but I'm having trouble accessing the internet, and my notes are on the internet. But that was one per unit is what I wrote down from that
yeah, that's what I
discussion.
had too.
What is the conversation that you were referencing about multifamily going back to the change in density that came about as a part of HB 2001, and the reason that studio apartments are 1.5, or was that a reference to the conversation that we more recently had about SROs, just to clarify?
I don't really remember. I've been.
Okay, yeah, it's getting a little complicated, right?
Which one it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said,
I think it was the last one we were at, because you were down we were sitting at the table.
yeah. And for me, it was just the single room occupancy. I thought we kind of were in the family of, well, in the same range as the studio apartment, kind of keeping things similar to that, but that was just kind of what I remember on the kind of around the conversation. I don't remember exactly where it landed.
Yeah.
We could check the minutes and see where it went.
Just my personal preference would be to have it be similar.
I think part of the discussion was that a single room occupancy with up to 6 rooms could look very similar to just a single family home. And really, the city would have kind of no way of knowing whether it's in individual bedrooms or rented out or not. So it could be functioning as an SRO, but be permitted as a single family dwelling. And in that case, only two parking spaces would be required. That was part of the discussion. Also, the fact that, requiring one space per unit, that takes up a lot of space on a site. So if the idea is to encourage this type of, or at least allow, facilitate this type of housing that could look like a single family home, having, a parking lot with 6 parking spaces that takes up a good chunk of your site.
Yeah, there's already a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
And right now we require 2 parking spaces, so. I think my main concern on this is not to be an outlier. That's my main concern, honestly, so that if somebody actually proposes a single room occupancy, that we don't have one of the highest parking standards, if not the highest in the state of Oregon, is my main concern. Because I think if we did, I think you could legitimately make the argument that there might be an argument to be made for reasonable cost and delay if our standards are way beyond everybody else's in Oregon. That was my main concern.
Hmm.
I don't really think they're gonna be proposed often, because I think most people are just gonna rent out the rooms in their single family home and
Yeah.
They're
not
just
tell
not
us.
gonna tell us. That
Exactly.
was where some of the
Well, and I
discussion
think
fell
that
as
right
well. that we
there
won't
is, I
know.
think, why that changed for me, I think, was we wanted people to just go ahead and report it if possible, because that would give us more parking spots than what they're probably gonna do.
Correct. So I think we were trying to come up with a way of like not being overly punitive. So if they do say, hey, we're gonna do this.
We get 4 more parking spots instead of
Exactly.
what we were gonna get. Okay.
I think
All right,
that
that's
is
the
where,
part that I wasn't.
I think that
remembering.
is where that landed eventually. It took a while,
Mhm.
like.
Yeah, I think, because I
work it.
remember people wanting the more parking spots, but then we kind of made that shift then to being like, okay, well, what's actually realistic and people are going to actually do.
I don't know how many of them are out there, but I know that I know of at least a couple dozen.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Back up to page 230. Diagram at the bottom. Am I the only one who wonders what that red line is for?
That means we're taking it out of the code.
Limbo.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Here I am trying to read that thing and figure out what's that red line there for?
That means it's deleted.
Oh, that's the best.
Because for one, that building is like the least Sandy style building in our, like, I don't know. People have looked at that and, oh, that's what you want built? Yes. I don't know. I think we just want that thing out of there. It has been not very helpful in the past.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Next one was 240. Top high.
Truck parking.
Yes, my question, this doesn't have to do with the wording of the code, but my question myself was, is this really enforced?
We have used this
Okay.
on at least 3 or 4 different occasions in my tenure here.
So
Because
here
some
we-
people that have big rigs try to park in areas that can't really accommodate them, to be quite honest. And we have used this because they'll get a lot of complaints from the neighbors. If it's like one night, nobody ever complains, but it's when it sits there for a week and
Okay,
it's taking up all the street parking and people can't see around it. And it hits the trees and everything else. Yeah, we have used it.
It's been an issue down by Hamilton Ridge Park in years past on occasion. Once in a while, we get a couple box trucks there that are like,
No, we have used it.
so exceeding a 110 capacity means a 110 capacity or 1 ton capacity would be okay. Okay, I guess that's what I was thinking. When I read it first, I thought, wait, 1 ton truck, doesn't have to be super big. Just, good size.
And I mean, honestly, we've only ever used this in code enforcement complaints. This
Yeah.
code section.
Okay, I only have one more.
It's amazing how after 200 pages of reading, you just
Yeah.
can start to get more sparse.
The blue looks good.
252. Well, I was glad. I was actually, Kelly, I was thinking of asking you like a week or so ago and say, hey, I'm anticipating this to be a lot of reading. Could we get it early? And you did a great job. We had, at least I found that I had sufficient time to read it through.
Yeah, we tried to get it to you a little earlier for that reason.
And you're without power for 4 days, though. You
Right.
lose a little bit of study time because the laptop didn't last.
Jerry
long.
probably printed it though. if I'm
No,
guessing.
no,
you didn't.
no.
There's
It's
not
all
enough
online.
ink.
Okay, my last one is 252. Bicycle racks.
Yes.
2, 3, 2. Yeah. Or 3.
Okay, what I wrote was requiring user supplied locks shall be designed so that the bicycle frame of one wheel can be locked to a rigid portion of the rack with both cable and U-shaped locks.
Is that not possible?
Well, I
I
don't,
don't own a bike anymore, so I don't
Either
know.
table or U-shaped locks, I think.
but both of them. In other words, you've got to be able to, as I read it,
Accommodate.
secure that bike there with a cable and a U-shaped. Not one or the other.
Should it say
Yes.
or?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I say one should be sufficient.
I don't know. Probably not.
I think the intent is to ensure that U-shaped locks could be used, because those are the more secure
True,
locks.
true.
Um,
And it's, I'm fine with it. It just, it both,
I don't think it's intended to be at the same time, but I mean, a cable is pretty flexible, so you could put,
well, if it
Um,
doesn't, if it's not intended to be at the same time, you would use the word either
Well,
cable or U-shape. Go ahead, Catherine.
excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that I think if we say either, then the issue is that somebody could have a design. So this is saying that the design has to accommodate both, right? The essential thing is that the design accommodates both. And if you said the design accommodates either, then the design could accommodate only, could be narrow or tighter constraint and would not necessarily accommodate, say, a U-shaped lock. So I think we're getting at here is this is about the design of the bicycle rack, and the design has to accommodate both. And we can try and clarify that, but we don't want to say that it can accommodate either or use or there, because that in fact isn't really what you want. You want the design to do both. Does that make sense?
Excellent
Yeah.
point, excellent point. So that we're talking about the design, not what the person has to do.
Exactly so.
In which case, both should stay.
Both should stay, but we could take a look and see if we could make that a little bit clearer. It is quite a complicated sentence. Maybe some different punctuation.
Right, it's still, yeah, it has to be designed so they can be locked with both. Okay, y'all can find a way at that.
Did you guys have any other ones? So I was gonna point out something on, if you don't have any other ones, on the bottom of 273 and the top of 274. Because Commissioner Ramsayer had asked about cul-de-sacs earlier, and I just wanted to point out where we've added additional standards around that. So if you guys don't have other ones, we can go down to 273. And this was based on the research that Shelley, one of our planners, did, and then based on a conversation that we had with the Planning Commission at a work session. This is what we came away with.
Any questions on any of it? Like they're allowed, but yes, but,
Exactly right.
yes, but Kelly.
It's not as open-ended as I read it several thousand pages ago.
Well, that was in the definition
Yeah.
too. And again, as the point was made, a good point, that the definition didn't
Right.
intended to set up this level.
Yeah, we, at the work session, we had asked the commission all these different points, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and this was the feedback that we received at the time. One of the most important parts is the fire code one on number 3.
Okay, any more questions, observations?
So one thing I did want to just kind of speak to you real quickly is that there's a pretty good list that you guys came up with, and I think it was a really good conversation and a lot of good catches that you made. I think what we'll do is we'll go through that list and we'll make refinements based on it, and then wherever we made an actual change, we'll take this list and include that as an exhibit for the city council to see all of your
Okay.
work. Because that will show them not only the thoroughness that you went through tonight, but also the changes since it was published on our website a couple weeks ago, in case any of them have taken a look. So,
Okay, we need a motion to pass this on to city council, assuming with our recommendation and our discussion points. Say,
Chair, I move that we approve file 23046, the clear and objective code audit to city council with our recommendations and changes.
I will second the motion.
okay, it's been moved and seconded to send the code, suggested code changes on to city council with our recommendations and changes. Let's do a roll call vote.
okay, Commissioner Wagoner,
Yes.
Commissioner Vincent,
Yes.
Commissioner Ramsar,
Yes.
Commissioner Poulin,
Yes.
Commissioner Myram,
Yes.
and Chair Crosby, it looks like leads off. So Chair Crosby.
Yes, motion carries. All right, let's see what the city council catches.
Do they do that usually?
Okay. If there's nothing else, I declare us adjourned.
Good night, everybody online.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.